In 1942, America committed one of its most atrocious acts on its own people. Stay tuned to find out why this is the case. Good morning, afternoon, and night. Whenever it may be when you are listening, I just want to invite you here with us today to History's Babblers with Sophia, Connor, and of course, me, Alejandro, where if we've got opinions, we babble away. Today we are here to talk about something more serious than usual, but equally important. A moment of history that should never be forgotten. Let us get started.
Sorry for the interruption. I just want to play this quick ad right before we get into it. Well, on the topic of wrongful acts, I'm here to quickly remind you that you can make a difference. Whether you know about it or not, one voice, one vote, you have the power to create a big change. We live in a country full of choices. Be brave and choose one, not only for you, but for everyone. Begin a change and register to vote.
Through Executive Order 9066, President Franklin D. Roosevelt committed a crime against his own citizens and changed thousands of lives forever in a wartime stress period. Families were torn apart, freedom was taken away, and America was not the land of the free. One man was all that it took to do this with the power vested in him, which begs the question, was this act ethically correct?
First of all, we need to talk about what was the actual reason that the U.S. decided to do the whole internment, and that all just originates from the fact that after the attack on Pearl Harbor, a lot of people in the U.S. were just fearful, and they had this sort of hate towards everyone of Japanese descent because they feared the fact that they could have been spies, which is, I guess, in a way you could see how this fear came to be, but at the same time, there's so many people that are innocent. There's thousands of lives in the U.S. that were of Japanese descent. They had to go and be in these internments just because of the fact that they are Japanese descent, which is incredibly, not fair. Anyways, do you know any ways that the Japanese were actually, treated?
Yes, actually, in a case study found at the Harry S. Truman Library, there was a particular case study that talked about 27 alleged troublemakers who were to be sent to the stockade rather than the camps. So, Sophia, what do you think the impacts the internment had on the families of those interned?
Well, actually, this is perfect. I was reading a book by Tetsuen Kashima called Judgment Without Trial, Japanese American imprisonment during World War II, that was really interesting and had a really good in-depth view of everything that the Japanese Americans had to go through. There were 10 chapters, I think, and they were all written in a way that helps it understand everything that went down. Anyways, I was reading the chapter talking about the impacts that the internment had on the families, and it was extremely interesting. It talked about many people who were in the internment camps stayed silent due to the trauma that it had. Many interned kept silent and sort of refused to talk to the subject, which is something that I completely understand. The issue that I was reading about was that many young Japanese Americans who had relatives in the camps actually started questioning whether or not they did something to deserve being there. That is, they started thinking that their relatives had actually done something wrong and had actual anger towards their parents. Many people blamed their parents because they couldn't see why else they would be forced into these camps. But their parents, traumatized, prefer to keep silent than remember their past, which is completely awful. I was reading about the families that were completely torn apart because of the anger that was brought between them and their parents.
That sounds absolutely terrible. I actually read about something similar to that after the Holocaust. Many relatives were in denial of their family members' hardships because of the silence that they withheld.
I know, one would think that word would be out, especially if something like this were to happen today. Hopefully never again, but if it were, I feel like it would be such a big topic and people would want to get the word out for others to see. But also, I completely understand how the trauma affected them.
What is this book called again?
Judgment Without Trial, Japanese American Imprisonment During World War II by Tetsuen Kashima. I recommend giving it a look.
Yeah, I'll have to look into it. There was also the Japanese Internment Compensation Bill, right?
Yeah, it was signed by Ronald Reagan in 1988, giving all interned a restitution payment of $20,000, which is insane, by the way. Not the money or the apology, but the fact that something so horrendous occurred that it induced an apology. It's insane to think that so many people were imprisoned, and I say in air quotes, and so long later they had to have an apology. $20,000 is not going to give back the 2.5 years that they spent interned. I actually have the video of the signing if you want to hear it.
Wow, how handy. Of course, let's hear it.
Thank you all very much. The members of Congress and distinguished guests, my fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong. More than 40 years ago, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the United States were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in makeshift internment camps. This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race, for these 120,000 were Americans of Japanese descent. Yes, the nation was then at war, struggling for its survival, and it's not for us today to pass judgment upon those who may have made mistakes while engaged in that great struggle. Yet we must recognize that the internment of Japanese Americans was just that, a mistake.
Well, that video was really interesting. Getting an apology over 40 years later didn't make the people forget. Well, anyway, let's move on to the historical context of this time. The main reason for Japanese internment is because of tensions between Americans towards people of Japanese descent. This is after the attack of Pearl Harbor, of course. They were interned because of fear from the West Coast and the U.S.'s belief of the possibility of being spies. According to FDR's Executive Order 9066, sourced from History Matters, the prosecution of war requires every possible protection against espionage and against sabotage. End quote. FDR gave the go for this on supposed counts of espionage and sabotage, as well as pressure from people at every level of the federal government. The U.S. took them and put them into desolate camps away from their homes and civilization. Before this, the U.S. put them in other areas such as fairgrounds and horse stalls and racetracks. They were put there for many months before they were moved to these internment camps. Other reasons why they were sent to camps was because of anti-Japanese Americans running wild and hysteria. In conclusion, there was no way of justifying the internment of innocent Japanese Americans during the war because of the nation's military and social worries. Hopefully, the U.S. has learned from its mistakes and will never do something like this again. We'll leave you with this advice. Just because many people make mistakes during the war doesn't mean it's okay to send hateful judgment. Well, anyway, thank you for listening, and thanks, Sophia.
Yeah, no problem.
And thank you, Alejandro.
Of course.
Yeah, so this was History's Babblers, reminding you that if you've got some opinions, then babble them away. See ya.